biggest mistakes people make when they're doing velocity banking. Let's get into it.
What is the goal? Knowing your goal up front is really important, because if you say the goal is to eliminate debt, then okay, I will focus my attention on assisting you in eliminating that debt. But if you tell me that the goal is legacy, the goal is income, the goal is to supplement my retirement, the goal is to retire early, how does eliminating this debt help you retire early? I'm not saying that it can't, but I'm looking for your understanding as to how these steps are going to help you hit that goal. And then if it doesn't, then what I'm going to do is kind of identify where some of those opportunities are. It all starts with knowing your number, understanding the process of how velocity banking works. And it looks something like this. Income comes in. Where does it traditionally go? It goes into your checking account. Once it hits your checking account, the idea is you take that income from that checking account and you dump it right onto a debt tool. And from that debt tool, you pay bills. Your income is making a stop before it pays bills. Traditionally, we do this. But what we're talking about is taking this income, putting it in a debt tool, paying bills from that debt tool. And when that happens, your cash flow lives on the debt tool, and then we rinse and repeat. When it comes to understanding the numbers, there's a few questions that I like to ask. Are you making additional payments towards the expenses that you currently have? So let's say you've got this credit card bill, and let's say it's maxed out. My first question is, what's the minimum on that card? Maybe it's 30, 40 bucks a month. But what are you paying? Are you paying that 30, 40 bucks a month, meaning that minimum, or are you paying something extra? 9 times out of 10, and there's nothing wrong with this, but 9 times out of 10, we are all paying something extra on our bills. So when you're trying to understand what is your cash flow, sometimes your cash flow gets lost in the extra payments that you're making on your bill. And so what are those lifestyle versus living expenses? What are those have tos versus those want tos? And is there an opportunity to adjust? And the expenses versus debt payments. Expenses to me are just the average everyday expenses that you're paying that aren't going to change. My cell phone bill will not change. My gas, my electric, it's always going to be there. But that credit card bill that's maxed out, I can get rid of that. That loan, that student loan, or that car loan, or the personal loan that I taken out, okay, I can get rid of that. That's a debt that once it's done, that additional cash flow is going to come back to me. So understanding what are your expenses versus what are those debt payments that you're making. Mistakes that I see, or the opportunities in this process that I see, are only focusing on debt, ignoring what's happening from an expense perspective and only focusing on what that debt looks like, and not making lifestyle adjustments. I had a client a while back. What they brought in every month and what was going out every month put them in a position to where they were in a negative position. And as we were breaking down their expenses and their debts, what we identified was there was a budget for date night and a budget for going out to eat. Well, couldn't that budget be merged together and maybe pick up some cash flow in that point? So understanding, or not making lifestyle adjustments to be able to get yourself out of this negative cash flow position, and then paying interest on those lifestyle costs. One of the things that is interesting to me as it relates to the velocity banking gurus and those who educate on velocity banking, the concept is, hey, all of my income goes into the debt tool, and the thought process is I should be paying bills from a credit card as well, paying bills from a debt tool as well. Yes, that is true, but not all situations does that make sense. What if you have this this normal expense, or this debt that you're paying, this bill that you're paying, that is not accruing interest, but because you're using a credit card to pay it, you're actually paying interest on a bill or interest on a debt that wasn't originally accruing interest. And if you're following velocity banking, that's okay, because once all your income go on the debt tool, it's going to take care of that normal expense. But if you're not using velocity banking effectively, just simply running that expense through the card and allowing that expense to sit and live on the card can cause you to start accruing interest on that debt when it wasn't intended to be that. And therefore, it could be pushing you in a position to where you may be over leveraged, or not addressing that amount that's sitting on that card in a timely fashion, causing that debt to just continue to reoccur. If you're going to run your expenses through a card, the idea behind that is, the reason I'm running it through the card is for all the other perks and benefits associated with having that card. Meaning the reason I'm paying my cell phone bill by credit card is so that I can get the cash back, or I can get the points, which again makes all the sense in the world. But if you're not paying off that expense that you put on the card on a monthly basis, your credit card is now accruing interest. And again, depending on where you are cash flow wise, that can cause other damages elsewhere when you're trying to achieve your true goal. And as it relates to cash flow, are you paying more than the minimums? And again, cash flow, what am I saying? I'm saying that you have a certain amount of income that comes in during the month. When that income comes in for the month and you pay your expenses and your debts for that month, what's left over? Usually it's one number, meaning it's, hey, once all expenses are paid, once all debts are paid, this is the dollar amount that's left. That's my cash flow. But when I start asking questions like, are you paying more than just the minimums? And in most cases, we all are. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's identifying where you're paying more than the minimums so that we can get a true understanding of what that cash flow is. Are you putting money into a savings account? Meaning, if your cash flow is $1,000 a month, but you're also putting away $1,000 a month into a savings account or a brokerage account or an IRA or something like that, that also should be taking into consideration that your cash flow is actually $2,000 a month, not just $1,000. And then does your cash flow vary from month to month? As an entrepreneur, this is an absolute fact. My income is not consistent. So therefore, as a result of my income not being consistent, I don't have a consistent cash flow. So therefore, in situations like this, we have to take the average. And then spreading your cash flow across multiple debts. I am not saying something is wrong with this. I'm just sharing with you when the question is asked, what is your cash flow? And we learn that you're making an extra mortgage payment every month, or that minimum payment on that Citibank card is $150, but you're paying $200. It's understanding where where these extra dollars are going. And here's why. We've been conditioned to perform this way. We've been conditioned to take our money and do this, meaning it goes, when we get paid, it goes out to pay bills. And velocity banking, the thought process, or the velocity of money, the velocity of, or the movement of money, and as it relates to paying off debt, the idea is you put it all together and you work in one direction. In that one direction, you're able to pay off debt faster, meaning the velocity in which you're paying off that debt happens faster. And so if your money's doing this, it's very difficult to pull it together and go in one direction. So understanding what your cash flow is very, very important here. And then not prioritizing debts. Therefore, the cash flow is gobbled up and it's less impactful. You've got, let's call it a high interest credit card, meaning 28, 29, 27% credit card that's maxed out. The minimum monthly payment is $1,000 a month, but you're putting $2,000 a month on it in hopes of bringing that balance down. But you've got this smaller credit card over here that maybe the balance on it is only $500 and it's costing you $40 a month. If you were to just take half of that additional $1,000 that you're putting on that larger credit card debt and simply pay off that smaller credit card, you would actually increase cash flow immediately. There's no longer a need to put away this $40 a month on this small debt that you could have paid off immediately. And then what happens is that additional $40 just became an increase in cash flow for you. And that increase in cash flow would now allow you to pay off some of those larger debt faster. So it's kind of prioritizing where your money is going, prioritizing what debt it makes sense to go after first. So, and then debt tools. Why are they important? Are they important? And what about them is actually important? I think people have watched so many, I'll call it gurus, walk through velocity banking, and it just seems so enticing, and it seems like it's so effective that everyone wants one. Like, I have to have a debt tool. I have to have this vehicle and run my income through it, because usually a lot of the comments that I get is, man, I have this debt tool, but I can't pay my mortgage through it. As though that's the reason why I can't continue doing velocity banking. And my take on that is, so what? Like, that should not impact your ability to be able to move forward, because the purpose of the debt tool, like, why is it important? What is the point or the purpose of the debt tool? To me, velocity banking is only about the debt tool. Velocity banking isn't about your goal. Velocity banking isn't about eliminating debt. To me, velocity banking is about the debt tool. If you have a debt tool and you are running your income through it, as you run your income through it and you pay bills from it, what happens is that cash flow lives on the debt tool. And what's happening is the balance, what was a maxed out credit card or a maxed out HELOC or whatever you're using as a debt tool, as the cash flow lives on it, there's room created. And as that room is created, you now have to go use that leverage, use that room on that debt tool to go pay down other bills. Well, if there's no room created, how do you pay down the other bills? If there's no room created, how do you address those other items that you're trying to? So it's all about the debt tool. what about the debt tool makes it important? Again, it's a vehicle that you can use for leverage. It's all about leverage. It's putting your money in a position to where, hey, because I can leverage the money inside this credit card, leverage the cash flow inside this HELOC, I can now use it elsewhere to pay down debt faster than just simply paying that minimum. We focus on the debt part, but really the debt tool is a vehicle that is designed to be used to help you accomplish your goal. It's a vehicle that's designed to be used to help achieve that end result. I had a young lady just today that I was talking to who is eligible for being able to have a $100,000 HELOC if she wanted, probably $200,000 HELOC if she wanted. What I was breaking down for her was an example that involved a $25,000 HELOC. So the question was, if I can qualify for $250,000, why would a $25,000 HELOC work for me? Sometimes the size of the vehicle doesn't matter. It's really, what is your cash flow? What do you have available to you to be able to pay it down, to be able to keep that interest at bay? Because just because you have access to a $200,000 HELOC doesn't mean anything if you can't pay it off in a timely fashion. Doesn't mean anything if you can't fully leverage it to be able to hit your goals without putting yourself in an over leveraged position. Because guess what happens when you put yourself in an over leveraged position? As it relates to debt tools, we've also been conditioned in a lot of, again, based off what we've seen from a lot of the gurus, there's only a set number of debt tools. It's home equity lines of credit, personal lines of credit, and credit cards. Don't forget, there's business lines of credit. Your savings account can be leveraged as a debt tool. A self-directed 401k, being able to borrow against your own money inside of your own 401k, can be leveraged as a debt tool, meaning a vehicle that can help free up cash flow for you so that you can address the debt. Now, these can't be tools that are used in the traditional sense of velocity banking, but they can absolutely be used as debt tools. So just understanding the difference. And here's ultimately what I mean. There have been many people that I've worked with where we start off in a conversation around velocity banking and we transition into debt snowball, or we transition into the avalanche method, ultimately saying this isn't the time where we should be driving our income through some vehicle. Maybe the best thing that you can do is borrow $50,000 from yourself inside your 401k, take that $50,000, put it in your savings, and then use that to go after the smallest debt, build up more and more cash flow so that we can then qualify for some type of debt tool and transition over to velocity banking. All of those things matter, meaning all of those things play a role. They all work together if you understand how they work together. One super red flag for me is when I hear someone say, oh, I've got a couple of debt tools that I use. Because again, the idea behind velocity banking, from my perspective, velocity banking is only about the debt tool. So if you are using multiple debt tools, that tells me that you're probably not doing velocity banking. That top bullet there, assuming you even need one. Meaning, let's first understand our numbers. Let's understand where things are positioned. Let's talk about what the goal may be. And then we determine, you know what, does velocity banking even play a role in this process? Losing leverage and or being over leveraged. And what does that even mean? Hey, I was doing velocity banking. I was making what I thought was decent progress on eliminating debt off of a credit card. And then all of a sudden, the bank dropped the credit limit. I was making movement and the balance was dropping, but then my credit limit dropped to match where the balance is. And then my credit score, went haywire. Or I had this line of credit and it had been maxed out for a long time. And I started doing velocity banking, started making headway. And then all of a sudden the bank transitioned my line of credit to a loan. So what's happening is the bank in that state is transforming or transitioning liability, meaning what was the line of credit meant the bank was liable, meaning on their balance sheet, it was showing as a liability to them. Well, because it was remaining maxed out, maybe you had too many of them. Maybe you weren't effectively using the line of credit the way it needed to be used. The minute they saw daylight, they immediately transitioned that line of credit over to a loan to kind of take that responsibility off their shoulders and put it back on yours. So being careful of trying to make sure you're not putting yourself in a position to where you're becoming over leveraged. And not knowing the cost and or the interest rate. So this is a big one. And there are different ends of the spectrum for both of these. I remember a couple that I was working with, and they were excited to get started with velocity banking. And they walked me through how they had just picked up, just received, just applied for and received some 0% credit cards. So the thought process was, we've got our debt tools because we've got these credit cards here with these limits on them, and there's no interest for the next 24 months. So this is absolutely going to be our debt tool. Only to understand and learn, as we peel back the layers, it actually didn't make sense for those cards to be the debt tool. It made sense for those cards to maybe be used to make their normal daily, weekly, monthly expenses from, and then using their actual debt tool that we identified, which was a higher limit card with a modest interest rate of somewhere around 11%, driving their income through that, and then paying off those 0% cards, on a monthly basis or whatever that frequency, because using those 0% cards for their daily expenses or their monthly expenses gave them time, gave them, I'll call it, room to be able to focus on other debts. So it's just really understanding where the opportunities are and knowing what those interest rates are on those debt tools that you're using. Because one of my pet peeves is using a 28% credit card as a debt tool to pay off a car loan that's 5%. The key is understanding the interest rate on the debt tool that you're wanting to use and what's that impact when you go to use it. And then understanding your limits. Because this goes back to that couple who had the 0% cards with no balance on them, thinking those were going to be the debt tools that they were going to use, only to realize that it's actually going to be a higher limit card with a modest or middle of the range or road interest rate. But because of how we were doing velocity banking and the debts that we were going after first, it just mathematically made the most sense. So understanding what your limits are on these cards could also identify where the opportunities are. Because how about this? Let's say you're thinking you're going to use a debt tool that only has a $1,000 limit, but you're trying to pay off debt that is $15,000, $16,000, $20,000 a clip. So therefore, how are you able to chunk away at those debts when you're using a debt tool with a limit not large enough? So, and again, that's one of those situations where maybe velocity banking isn't the answer. But my take on credit score is it is meant to be a tool. It is meant to fluctuate. Meaning when you need your credit score to be high because you have a purchase that you want to make, then it should be high. But while you're doing velocity banking, while you're addressing debt, what honestly are you doing? You're pissing banks off is what you're doing. So as you piss off your creditors, what are they going to do? Your credit score is going to take a dip because you're doing things that they weren't expecting you to do. You're paying off debts that they were hoping they were going to have you handcuffed in for the rest of your life. And as you start to pay them off, depending on the type of debt that you end up paying off, will have some type of impact on your credit. So just accept it. Your credit score is designed to fluctuate. And so what is that impact on your DTI? Well, as you address debt, it should get smaller, right? But if you're using a debt tool and you are chunking away at debt every so often, the balance on that debt tool is going to increase, which means your utilization is going to increase, which means it's going to impact your credit score, which means it's going to impact your DTI. All of these things are gonna be impacted. So I think it's understanding how your credit score is impacted, how your DTI is impacted, and becoming comfortable with the fact that because I'm taking action and I understand what my goal is, it doesn't matter during these months what my credit score is, because I'm not focused on trying to buy a house or a car or trying to qualify for anything to begin with. I am focused on eliminating this debt. Is there something specific that you need to qualify for? Are you planning to buy a home? Do you need to qualify for that HELOC so that you can have a true debt tool? Are you applying for a job? And a lot of people forget qualifying for the role that you're trying to qualify for, and or insurance can be gravely impacted by what your credit score is. So it just depends on the type of insurance and the type of insurance company you're working with. So it's not, I'll call it a one size fits all type thought process, but the bottom line is understanding the impact of you doing velocity banking on some of those other actions that you're wanting to take. Do you need to improve that relationship with your current lender? Helping them understand what your objectives are and what is that impact, and understanding their expectation of you as you move through this process as well. And I run into a lot of people who feel like they're actually making headway from a velocity banking perspective because they have multiple debt tools. Again, multiple debt tools is a red flag for me, but they've got multiple debt tools and they seem to be moving money around, but they don't seem to be making much progress on eliminating debt. The point of velocity banking isn't just making sure your money is moving. It's being very intentional on how and where your money is going. And again, I go back to we've been conditioned to believe that when money comes into our checking account, it goes out to pay a bill. But if we merge our income together and focus on one bill at a time, we can actually pay it off faster. And in this case, if all of our income is going on the debt tool, that the balance on that debt tool is dropping so fast that we run into a situation where now what do we pay off? Now what do we do? Now what can we collectively throw at another debt or use the velocity of money to be able to pay off debt faster? So velocity doesn't necessarily mean just movement. It's very intentional, and it's being intentional towards a specific goal. Being financially secure doesn't necessarily mean debt free. And I think this rubs some people the wrong way, specifically my Dave Ramsey's folks. You can have your home paid off, but not be in a position to where you can stop working. You can have no mortgage left on your home, but also be broke. Just because you have addressed some debt and it took you 20 years, 15 years, 5 years to pay off this home doesn't necessarily mean you put your family in a position to where you can actually generate and build wealth or generate income. You're just living in a home that you don't have a mortgage on, but how are you leveraging that home? How are you using that home to build wealth? And how much time was lost in the process of becoming debt free? The true goal was never to pay off the truck. The true goal was never to pay off that student loan. The true goal was to generate wealth or leave a legacy for my kids or be able to retire early or to fire my job. The true goal was creating a vehicle that I could start generating and building income. All of this works together. So it's not this or that. It's absolutely and it's how. It's how these things work together and how can I leverage all of these different tools to accomplish the true goal. So it all goes back to, it's all full circle back to what is the true goal. And again, I believe it was never about a debt. And so in kind of to button all of this up, we talked about some of the biggest mistakes being made within velocity banking. The moral of the story is these conditions, these habits also multiply, meaning not only is it being careful of how you're identifying your debt tool, understanding your numbers and the impact of paying extra on bills, but understanding the snowball effect that this also has and the how these issues multiply